Everyone left the shelter with a cat in their arms. Everyone, except him. He had stopped hoping weeks ago. Curled up in the farthest corner of the communal cage, he'd taught himself how to disappear. He wasn't the fluffiest or the cutest. One of his eyes drooped slightly, giving him a perpetually tired look, as if he had lived twice the life his tiny body should have. When people walked by, he didn't meow. He didn't try to charm them like the others. He just watched, quietly, and they looked right through him. The days fell into each other like gray dominoes. Morning meant the lights clicked on, the cages opened, and the noise began. Kittens crying for attention, tails swishing, paws clawing at the metal bars. Afternoon brought visitors, bright coats, laughter, little fingers pointing through glass. Names were called. Cinnamon, Pumpkin, Mr. Whiskers. Giddy children cradled chosen cats, promising to love them forever. But no one ever said his name. The shelter staff had stopped trying to sell his story. At first, they'd speak kindly of him. He's quiet, gentle, very observant. Later, they'd just shrug. He's still here. Even the other cats began to treat him like background noise. Some teased. One had called him Deadeye. Another hissed every time he got close. Eventually, he stopped trying. Even loneliness has a breaking point. He found his rhythm in small things. A ray of sun that hit the far wall at exactly 3:17 p.m. The soft hum of the vending machine in the hallway. The way the night smelled. Bleach, wet fur, and something faintly metallic. He counted the times he heard the back gate open, even though it never meant anything for him. It was easier to measure days in sounds than in hope. Once, a little boy had stopped in front of his cage. Big eyes, cheeks flushed from running. For a second, their eyes met. The cat held his breath. The boy stepped closer. "What about this one?" he asked. The mother didn't even look. "Not that one, sweetie. He looks weird." That night, he didn't move from his spot at all. Not even when dinner came. He just lay there, chest barely rising, his tail limp against the metal floor. That was the first time he wished he hadn't been born. The winter came fast that year. The heater in the back of the shelter broke, and though they tried to compensate with old towels and heating pads, it was never enough. The cats huddled together, instinct over pride. But no one huddled with him. He stayed near the vent, shivering, silently, his breath forming little clouds in the air. One night, the power went out. Total darkness swallowed the shelter. Panic spread quickly. Meows, crashes, claws against metal. He didn't move. He just listened. To the chaos, to the wind against the windows, to his own heart slowing in the cold. He wondered if anyone would notice if he simply disappeared. And then came the storm. Rain hammered the roof like war drums. Thunder cracked so close it shook the floor. The other cats cried and ran in circles, but he just sat there, blinking slowly. He watched the water seep under the door, watched as it crept across the floor like a shadow with teeth. The shelter was leaking, crying, just like him. That night, as the world screamed outside, he made peace with something inside. If no one would choose him, maybe he wasn't meant to be chosen. Maybe his purpose was to exist in the in-between. A ghost with a heartbeat, waiting for something that would never come. But he didn't know that the next morning, everything would begin to change. The storm passed, but it left something behind. Not just puddles and broken tiles, but a silence even heavier than before. The shelter opened late the next day. A tree had fallen on the main road. The staff came in shivering, dragging their feet through the wet floor, grumbling about pipes and leaks. The cats cried for breakfast, hungry and cold. He didn't cry. He hadn't made a sound in days, but his eyes were open. The corner where he slept was damp. His fur was clumped, heavy with humidity. He tried to clean himself, but his tongue trembled. Still, he watched, always watching. That day, no visitors came. Maybe the weather had scared them off. Maybe the world had forgotten about this place. Just like it had forgotten about him. The days blurred. He began to dream strange things. A girl with no face. A window without glass. A hand reaching for him but never quite touching. He'd wake up to the metal bars in front of him, the same cold bowl, the same scratching sounds from the others. Sometimes he tried to pretend, to imagine he was somewhere else. In a house, on a couch, with soft cushions and the smell of soup coming from a kitchen. He would imagine a name whispered in a warm voice, something gentle, something real. But reality always pulled him back by the tail. One afternoon, the shelter brought in a new kitten. Golden fur, huge eyes, a meow that sounded like a melody. Within 10 minutes, a family was already filling out adoption papers. They didn't even look at the others, just walked in, scooped her up, and left. The forgotten cat sat there, unmoving. He could hear the other cats whisper. She barely stayed a day. He's been here forever. Maybe he smells weird. Maybe he's cursed. He didn't respond, but something cracked inside. That night, he didn't lie in his usual corner. He climbed onto the narrow ledge by the window, the one no one ever reached because it was too cold, too high. He pressed his body against the glass and looked out. Streetlights flickered outside. Snow was starting to fall. And somewhere, far down the street, a little girl walked alone, hugging something tight to her chest. He didn't know why, but he followed her with his eyes until she disappeared. The next day, the shelter was quiet again. Too quiet. He felt it before it even happened. That feeling of something about to shift. The staff were whispering, cleaning more than usual, putting up signs. Adoption day. He didn't move from the window ledge. He watched as the first families came in, coats zipped up, cheeks pink from the cold. Kids laughed, adults pointed. The other cats danced and purred, brushing up against the cage walls, performing their practiced routines. He just watched. One by one, the others were taken, even the ones that hissed, even the one who used to bite the staff, even the blind one. By late afternoon, his cage was almost empty. Just him, alone, again. The shelter manager stood in the doorway. "Well," she muttered, "maybe next time." He lowered his head. And then, the door opened again, slowly, quietly. No fanfare, no laughter. Just a girl, hood up, hands in her sleeves, shoes soaked in slush. She walked in like she was carrying the weight of winter in her bones. She didn't go to the kittens. She didn't crouch and coo like the others. She walked slowly, scanning the cages, as if looking for something very specific, something no one else had wanted. When her eyes found him, she stopped. He didn't move. He didn't blink. For the first time in days, his breath caught in his throat. She stepped closer, looked at the empty bowls, the damp blanket, looked at the way he pressed himself into the window like he wanted to vanish into the snow outside, and then she knelt. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she whispered, so softly he almost didn't hear, "You look like me." The staff didn't understand. They told her he was antisocial, that he'd never been adopted, that he wasn't really affectionate. She looked at them, eyes tired and glassy. "I know," she said. "That's why." The paperwork took 15 minutes. The bond took half a second. As she carried him out in a borrowed carrier, the other cats didn't make a sound. Maybe they felt it. that something sacred was being stitched back together. Not just a cat and a girl, but two broken pieces of a world that never asked if they were okay. And for the first time in his life, he left the shelter. Not in a dream, not in imagination, but in her arms. The girl's apartment was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that presses against your chest, heavy and constant, like a reminder of everything that once filled it, but no longer does. The walls were bare, except for a single, faded poster of a tree without leaves. The heater coughed every few minutes, struggling to warm the cold corners of the room. When she opened the carrier, the cat didn't move at first. He just sat there, pupils wide, taking in the strangeness of freedom. He wasn't sure what this place was. It didn't smell like bleach and fear. It smelled like dust and sadness, and something else. Something gentler. Something almost like longing. She didn't try to touch him. She just sat on the floor, across the room, pulled her knees to her chest, and watched. He crept out slowly, his paws soft against the cracked linoleum. Every sound made him flinch, the distant hum of a fridge, the sharp creak of the ceiling, even the soft shuffle of her breathing. He explored in silence, tail low, ears half folded. No cages, no other cats, no cold steel bowls or hard concrete floors. Just her, and the silence. She watched him with the kind of stillness that comes from knowing what it's like to be watched, to be judged, to be chosen last, or never at all. That night he slept under her bed. Not beside her. Not yet. But close enough to hear her breathe. She cried, once, when she thought he wouldn't notice. Her hand over her mouth, body shaking like a leaf in a storm. He didn't understand why, but something inside him stirred. That same soft ache he'd felt when she whispered, "You look like me." It wasn't pity, it was recognition. Like two shadows had met in the dark and realized they weren't alone after all. He didn't come out, but he didn't sleep either. He just lay there, eyes open, listening to the small pain of someone who didn't want to be heard. Over the next few days, they found a rhythm. She left in the morning and came back with the sunset. Sometimes she brought food in plastic bags, sometimes nothing at all. She barely spoke, not even to herself. But every time she came home, she looked for him first. Not with words, with her eyes. And when she found him, she nodded once, as if to say, "You're still here, I'm still here. That's enough for now." He started to wait for that moment. The sound of keys at the door, the tired steps, the glance that said more than 1,000 sentences ever could. She didn't give him a name right away. Names meant belonging, meant permanence. Maybe she didn't think she could offer that. Maybe she was afraid it would break the spell. But one night, as he lay curled near the window, watching snowflakes dance in the streetlight, she whispered, "Ghost." Her voice cracked around it, soft as a breath. "You're like a ghost, quiet, but still here." He blinked slowly. He didn't know what a ghost was, but somehow it felt right. A presence that shouldn't exist, but does. Something people overlook, but can't quite forget. Just like her. Just like him. He began to follow her more. From a distance at first, into the kitchen, into the bathroom, sitting across the room as she read with tired eyes and trembling hands. She didn't touch him, but she left space. Space on the couch. Space on the bed. Space in her life that slowly, without saying it, became his. And one morning, as she sat by the window with a mug too big for her hands, he jumped up beside her. He didn't curl into her lap or purr, he just sat. Still. Present. She looked at him, eyes puffy from sleep or sorrow. He couldn't tell. And whispered, "Thank you for staying." It was the first time he felt like he had done something right. Like his existence meant more than survival. Like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't broken. He was healing. Slowly, quietly, alongside someone who needed healing too. They were still shadows in a world that forgot to care. But now, they moved together. She had once been surrounded by voices. Loud, opinionated, careless voices that filled rooms with noise, but never really said anything. At school, she was the girl in the back, the one with her hoodie always up, sleeves pulled down to hide the tremble in her fingers. People didn't dislike her. They just didn't see her. Except when they needed someone to blame, to laugh at, to push out of the frame. Her family wasn't cruel, just distant. The kind of distance that doesn't slam doors, but closes them softly and never opens them again. Over time, she learned how to disappear without leaving. Her room had once had posters, photos, dreams taped to the walls. But each year, something came down and nothing replaced it. By the time she turned 15, the walls were bare, just like her voice. She stopped raising her hand, stopped making eye contact. When a teacher asked if everything was okay, she smiled. The kind of smile that means, "Please don't look too hard." And no one did. They accepted her silence like people accept background noise. Something there, but not worth noticing. Her world shrank, from the classroom to the apartment to a single room with the lights off most days. So when she saw the cat at the shelter, small, trembling, with eyes that had given up long ago, she didn't see an animal. She saw herself. She didn't need a pet. She wasn't trying to save something. She just couldn't bear to walk away from a reflection that raw, that honest, that wounded. There was no dramatic decision, no heroic rescue, just a quiet moment of mutual recognition. And when she said, "You look like me," she meant it in the deepest way. Not just appearance, but existence. Both of them, forgotten by everyone else, were suddenly unforgettable to each other. He responded slowly, with patience, hesitation, instinct. At first, he flinched when she walked too fast, hid when something fell. But every day he came a little closer, and she noticed. She began to speak, just a little, not to the world, just to him. "Rough day, ghost," she'd murmur as she dropped her bag. Or, "You still here?" On nights when she came home later than usual. He never replied, of course, but sometimes he would blink slowly, that long, deliberate blink that cats give only when they trust you. And for her, that was enough. Then one morning, something changed. She opened her eyes to find him sleeping beside her. Not at the foot of the bed, not across the room. Right next to her, his body curved into the space between her arm and her ribs. She didn't move for minutes, just stared at the rise and fall of his tiny chest. She could feel the weight of him, fragile but real. Her hand hovered for a second, before resting gently on his back. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just breathed. For the first time in years, so did she. That day, she looked at herself in the mirror a little longer than usual. Her eyes were tired, but softer. Her shoulders still hunched, but not so tightly. She tied her hair back, not for anyone else, just to see her own face. Something about having someone to come home to, even if it was a silent, four-legged soul, made the world outside feel less sharp, less deadly. Ghost became her anchor, and maybe, in her own quiet way, she became his. They still didn't speak much, but they had their language. A paw on the ankle meant he wanted her nearby. A head bump against her leg meant stay. She learned his rhythms. How he circled the windowsill 3 times before resting. How he watched her with one eye open when she read. How he waited by the door when she left. Not because he wanted to go, but because he wanted her to come back. In the silence they shared, healing began. Not loudly, not all at once, but piece by piece, like broken glass being arranged into something that didn't need to be whole to be beautiful. Healing never announces itself. It doesn't arrive like a sunrise, bright and obvious. It creeps in through small moments, quiet choices, and the soft persistence of presence. For Ghost and the girl, healing looked like routine, like a chipped mug filled with warm tea, like the sound of paws following footsteps from room to room, like knowing someone would notice if you didn't come home. Their lives didn't become easier, but they became shared. And that changed everything. Each morning, Ghost would be waiting at the edge of the bed. He never meowed. He simply sat there, patient and still, until she opened her eyes. That silent greeting was enough to remind her, "You're not alone anymore." She began to wake a little earlier, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Mornings with him became rituals, brushing his fur with her fingers, placing his food beside hers, listening to the tiny crunches as he ate. Those mundane acts carried weight now. They tethered her to the present. Outside, the world remained indifferent. School was still hard. People still avoided her, or worse, mocked her softly behind hands and screens. But she carried Ghost with her, not physically, but inside. In the way she walked with a little more steadiness. In the way her gaze didn't drop as quickly when someone looked her way. She had something no one else could take, a bond untouched by judgment or rejection. When the world felt unbearable, she would remember the way Ghost leaned into her chest when she cried. No expectations, just closeness. Ghost, too, began to change. His steps became more confident. His tail, once always low, began to flick lightly as he moved. He explored more, not just the apartment, but the air around her. He'd sit beside her while she studied, occasionally tapping her pencil with his paw. At night, he began to purr. Not loud, not constant, but enough to make her pause and smile. That sound became a melody of safety, of trust, of quiet love. One evening, something unusual happened. She brought home a sketchbook. She hadn't drawn in years, not since before everything fell apart. She sat on the floor, legs crossed, Ghost in her lap, and began to draw him. Slowly, hesitantly. Her hand trembled at first, unsure if she remembered how to create beauty. But as she traced the soft bend of his spine, the droop of his left eye, the way his ears tilted slightly back, something settled in her. She wasn't drawing a cat. She was drawing survival. Her own. That night, she pinned the drawing to her wall, the first thing that had hung there in years. Ghost sat beneath it, as if recognizing himself, and blinked that long, slow blink that meant everything was okay. From that moment, the wall began to fill again. Sketches, quotes, a photo of them together, taken with a shaky hand and an old phone. Each piece told a story of something returning, not loudly, but surely. Sometimes she still broke. Shadows from the past crept in uninvited. Nights where her chest tightened and she couldn't breathe right. But Ghost never left. He'd sit beside her, eyes wide, still as a statue. He didn't try to fix anything. He just stayed. And that, more than any word or gesture, was enough to pull her back. Together, they created a rhythm that made life livable, a silence that held warmth instead of cold. a companionship that didn't demand explanations. They were still two broken things, but they had stopped bleeding. And in that quiet, tentative healing, they were learning how to be whole again. Years passed quietly, like a snowfall that no one notices until everything is white. The girl wasn't a girl anymore. She had grown slowly but surely, like a vine finding its way through broken brick. The apartment changed with her. The walls once bare now covered in sketches, photos, little fragments of life that proved she had lived. In every corner there was evidence of love. A blanket folded just for Ghost, a chair with a scratch he'd claimed as his own, a plant he liked to sleep beneath, though it always wilted from the warmth of his body. Ghost aged, too. His fur turned thinner, his jumps lower, but his eyes stayed the same, quiet, observant, and a little sad, as if he still remembered too much. The world outside had continued spinning, uncaring, but inside their home, time moved with tenderness. She talked more now, to him, to others. She had a job at a small art shop and taught weekend classes to kids who didn't quite fit anywhere else. When people asked why she always wore the same necklace, a tiny silver charm shaped like a curled cat, she'd just smile and say, "It was a gift, from someone who saved me." Visitors came sometimes, friends, students, a neighbor with too many cookies. They all noticed the same thing when they walked into her apartment. The drawing. Framed above the small bookshelf, right where sunlight hit it every morning, was a portrait, a girl with tangled hair and soft, tired eyes. And in her arms, a cat with a crooked face, pressed tight against her chest. At the bottom, in small letters, the words, "He was the only one who didn't look away." One afternoon, a little boy visiting with his mother stopped in front of it. "Why that cat?" he asked, pointing. The woman paused, her hand resting gently on the back of the chair Ghost had once claimed. She looked at the drawing, not just with her eyes, but with every part of herself. And then softly she said, "Because he didn't ask me to be someone else. He just stayed." That night, after everyone had gone and the lights were low, she walked to the window and stood in silence. Snow was falling again, thick, gentle flakes drifting through the glow of the street lamps. She reached down and picked up the old frayed blanket that still lay folded at the foot of her bed. She held it close, then laid it softly where Ghost used to sleep. And for a long time, she sat there, not sad, not empty, just full, with memory, with gratitude, with the ache of something precious that had once been hers. In the world's eyes, he was just a shelter cat no one wanted. In hers, he was everything.